Thank you for joining us for our topic, Human Trafficking Prevention Texas. My name is Jody Goodkin, and I will be your presenter. I've been a physical therapist for 28 years and involved in physical therapy education for over 20 years. I look forward to discussing this topic with you today. Human Trafficking Prevention is an online recorded video continuing education course that's developed specifically for healthcare professionals. We're going to focus on defining what is human trafficking and the characteristics that make someone vulnerable to becoming a victim, the health impacts that they experience, as well as red flags to identify individuals who are potentially victims, assessment strategies, and the role we can play as healthcare providers in connecting individuals with appropriate resources to escape their trafficking situation. The rationale for the course is to prepare the healthcare provider with knowledge and an understanding of available resources and mechanisms to play a role in supporting victims in escaping their trafficking situation. It is designed to satisfy the training requirements for Texas House Bill 2059. The goals and objectives of this course will focus on the legal definitions related to human trafficking, ways that we can identify individuals who are potentially victims of human trafficking, as well as the health conditions that they experience, and how to safely interact with an individual who is potentially a victim, report tips, and connect them with appropriate resources. As with any course that you attend, when you go back to apply this information in the clinic, you're going to do so in accordance with the federal, state, and professional regulations where you practice. In addition, you'll follow any established policies and procedures for the facility. You're going to watch this 1-hour recorded video course, and you'll notice on several of the slides an icon on the bottom right that says, "Consider this." That's to let you know that those particular slides will be helpful when you go to complete the post-test for the course. After watching the video, you will return to our website, cheapceus.com, to complete the post-test. It can be retaken multiple times if needed to achieve at least a passing score of 70%. Then you will submit your payment and be able to print the certificate for your completion of the continuing education hour. Let's first define what is human trafficking. When individuals are forced, lied to, manipulated into physical servitude or sexual exploitation situations where their basic human rights and dignities are deprived to them, and it's leveraged for the financial gain of other individuals, this is considered human trafficking. It is the business of stealing freedom for profit and modern-day slavery. In 2000, there was a comprehensive federal law that was enacted, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. This was designed to provide a single approach that has 3 prongs to it. It is focusing on prevention, protection, and prosecution to combat human trafficking. As healthcare providers, we are on the front lines of being able to recognize individuals who are potentially victims of human trafficking. You might be surprised to find out that traffickers do actually bring their victims in to receive medical services. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen until the individual has sustained significant injuries that prohibit them from being a financially beneficial worker for their trafficker. They might have experienced injuries from abuse that they've suffered, from malnourishment, injuries from work environments where they didn't have the appropriate training, dental issues. It was noted in a 2014 study that 87% of the survivors that had accessed healthcare services while they were being trafficked, and most of them went unidentified. We have a unique opportunity to step in and assist in identifying these victims, connecting them with resources to help escape their trafficking situation. Polaris is a global organization that is fighting the battle of human trafficking. They have analyzed different statistics from the United States and recognized that human trafficking has 25 different types that it occurs as and how it may present in the situations the individual is experiencing being a victim. The first one that may come to mind to you is sexual servitude or commercial sex acts. While that is one type of human trafficking, labor trafficking is another form that can occur in different landscaping and agriculture, as well as restaurants and manufacturing. The individuals may be in the kitchens or on the work crews that are coming in to do cleaning at a facility where you're located. If you're going into home care settings, it might be the individual who is the nanny for the child or the elder care provider. They might be a victim of human trafficking. When we're looking at health and beauty services, particularly the massage industry, we might notice individuals who are victims of human trafficking that we are working down the hall from, where we're performing legitimate services, but something different is happening down the hallway. So we're going to discuss how we can play a role in opening our eyes to understanding the different types of trafficking and where we should be looking to spot potential victims to assist them. There are two main forms of severe trafficking that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act identifies. It's labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Labor trafficking is when the individual is induced to perform work and services for their trafficker, where they're not appropriately compensated, they are forced, or fraud is utilized, threats to have them continue to work, where their human basic dignities and rights are deprived to them. This can occur in a variety of different settings. Some individuals work excessive hours. They have irregular schedules. They may not like what they're doing. This doesn't mean that they're a victim of labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is occurring when the individual is lured in with false promises about what's involved in the work. They're working excessive hours against their will under intolerable circumstances. This might be occurring around us in healthcare in nursing homes, the janitorial staff, the kitchen staff, potentially the home health aide that's additionally providing services side by side with us. If you're going into the home care settings, we're going to be aware of individuals who are working in that home and providing care, could potentially be victims of human trafficking. In addition to farms, factories, hotels, and recreational facilities. We might see individuals coming into our clinic as patients who are potentially victims, or the individual accompanying our patient. So we're going to open our eyes to being aware of the red flags that we'll discuss all the time that we are practicing. Particularly in the agricultural industry, individuals at a higher risk because of the migrant nature and seasonal nature of the work where they're moving around, it places them at a greater risk. One story to give an example of how labor trafficking occurs, I had read about a young woman in Botswana who wanted to come to the United States to receive her education. She was told that a family wanted to sponsor her and bring her here. So she did come. Unfortunately, the woman was bounced around to different households, was abused, forced to work as a nanny, forced to work in a daycare situation with children, and then live in intolerable circumstances. And she was never given the education that she thought she was coming over for and that bright future she was looking for. There are many different ways that traffickers lure in their victims. Sex trafficking is another form of severe trafficking that involves the performance of commercial sex acts by adults as well as children. This may occur in bars as well as escort services, pornography, truck stops. Those might be the first settings that come to place where this is occurring. Other areas that we need to consider is illicit massage, health, and beauty. Be aware when you're in your setting that you may be part of a legitimate business, but the next doors down, watch the clients coming and going. Watch the service providers coming in and out. Are they brought in all together? Have to leave together? That there are patrons coming in where it doesn't seem like they're actually receiving true therapeutic service. Additionally, in the home settings, individuals may be retained as personal sexual servitude victims in different home settings. Commercial sexual exploitation of children occurs with individuals below the age of 18 who are forced to perform commercial sex acts. What makes it a commercial sex act is when something of value is exchanged for the performance of the sex act. Could be food, could be shelter, could be gifts, could be many different circumstances. Someone who's under the age of 18, they cannot consent to the performance of these acts. They are minors. So anytime it involves a minor, regardless of whether they are telling you what a fabulous situation it is, the lifestyle they have, the gifts they receive, it is still sexual exploitation of the minor. They are unable to provide consent. As we look at the difference between smuggling and human trafficking, they may seem the same on the surface, but there are some specific differences. One aspect to recognize is that trafficking does not require crossing international state borders. While it may have someone transported, an individual could be maintained in one location and still be a victim of human trafficking. They may be native to the country where the trafficking is still occurring. It doesn't mean it's a foreign national that was brought in. Trafficking is that exploitation component where the individual is forced into sex acts or labor for the benefit of another individual. It is non consensual, it's a crime against that person. Smuggling, on the other hand, is recognized when an individual is specifically trying to avoid the normal immigration process. They're trying to skip a typical legal process. They're coming into a country against the laws, but they are acting of their own free will if it's smuggling. Consent is something important to understand. When considering human trafficking, if that individual is lured in by false promises, they may have initially consented for that better life, that good opportunity, the experience they thought that they were getting. If they initially consented and then the circumstances change and they are being forced into a situation against their will, sexual exploitation or labor, it is still trafficking, even though they initially consented, because what they agreed to isn't the circumstance that they end up in where they are being exploited. Looking at individuals who are adults who willingly participate in sex acts, their human rights are not being infringed upon. They are consenting. Whatever value is being given to the sexual work that they're performing, if they're keeping that for themselves, that is not human trafficking. Sex trafficking occurs when it is sexual exploitation and they are not consenting. Throughout the presentation, I have several slides similar to this one where there are quotes from survivors of human trafficking. It's recognized that in order to combat human trafficking, everyone needs to understand the perspective of the individuals who are victims, to appreciate what they have gone through, their mindset, and the road ahead for them in order to establish their own life. So I've included several of these quotes throughout the presentation to provide you with that perspective, and I encourage you to pause for a moment, read them, and reflect as we work our way through this presentation. Individuals who end up in a trafficking situation are controlled by their traffickers in several different ways. Force is the first one, where they are exerting some type of control through a physical means, abuse, creating drug dependency, just isolating the individual and causing physical harm. Fraud are those false promises that were used to lure the individual in, that they are trying to encourage them into the situation under false pretenses, whether it's financial, emotional, or psychological. Coercion is a little bit different. This specifically is involving threats of harm to another individual or to that individual. It is psychological manipulation. The victims are often reluctant to come forward because the traffickers use this coercion to leverage their vulnerabilities, create dependency on the trafficker, and the individual may be so concerned about harm that they continue in the trafficking situation, or they're compliant because they're so maybe embarrassed about the situation they're in or what will be told to other individuals about what they're participating in, that they just feel like they have to continue in the situation. Involuntary servitude is one type of situation someone who's being trafficked may find themselves in. Individuals are under extreme psychological and emotional control. They believe that they truly have no other option but to remain in the trafficking situation because something worse will happen to themselves or someone else. It may be threats related to their legal status, maybe crimes that are associated with the trafficking situation that the trafficker convinces them they will be held responsible for, compulsory labor that they feel they have to continue with, or that sexual exploitation because of that fear of something else happening that's worse. They just think they have to continue. Debt bondage is a little bit different. This occurs where an individual is charged a fee for whatever opportunity they're being given, and the trafficker continues to increase that fee, or because they're housing them and keeping them in the same location where they're working or experiencing that sexual exploitation. Maybe they're charging them for their living expenses, for food, for toiletries, basic necessities. And the fee that the trafficker is charging keeps going up, and the wage that they're giving the worker will never catch up. That the trafficker ends up keeping all the money, the individual is still in debt to the trafficker, and they have nothing for themselves while enduring these inappropriate, intolerable circumstances, and that's debt bondage. In terms of developing resources and ways to assist individuals exit their trafficking situation, and just even understanding the scope of it, there are many limitations in the data that's available. While many organizations are trying to get the information, there just really are some challenges to recognizing the full scope of the problem. And one is that these crimes are very complex. They might be happening in tandem with other legal businesses, where you have the illegal criminal activity of trafficking occurring right alongside the legal business. So it almost goes unnoticed. This also poses challenges for criminal investigations. So law enforcement is being educated to just keep their eyes open in all situations that human trafficking may also be occurring, and they may recognize those cases as they're investigating other types of crimes. Victims may also be difficult to identify because they're not appropriately classified. That if the individual does not share the circumstances they're enduring and that it's a trafficking situation, they could inappropriately be recognized as the criminal by law enforcement. Maybe they're the one who possesses the drugs or possesses the illegal weapons. If they don't have appropriate documentation, because that is how the trafficker is controlling them by keeping their documents, well, now they may be considered undocumented migrants in the country. Also, they are not likely to come forward. So if they're not sharing that information, it's challenging to really see all of the settings and the number of individuals who are impacted and victims of human trafficking. There are many changes that are occurring to try and get a better understanding so we can identify these individuals to assist them. The ICD codes have been modified to leverage the ability of healthcare providers to assist in identifying victims and getting more information so that better plans can be put in place and resources. One way this is done is that some of the codes are set up to allow for identification of individuals at risk for labor and sex trafficking. For example, individuals who demonstrate signs of neglect or maltreatment, so that this can be tracked to better support addressing human trafficking. There are many misconceptions about human trafficking. The data demonstrates that it exists in cities as well as suburbs. It's been noted across all 50 states, the District of Columbia, as well as the U.S. territories. Victims are adults as well as children. They're educated and uneducated individuals, and victims are also males. This is not just a crime against females. Up to 18% of individuals who are victims of trafficking are males. Globally, labor trafficking is more common, making up 62% of the cases. And data also demonstrates that 50% of individuals who are in a trafficking situation were unidentified during their time with healthcare professionals because they did not self-identify. These are silent victims forced into situations of no fault of their own that we really have an opportunity to assist escape their situation. The victims of human trafficking can be any age or gender. They may be U.S. citizens or they may be natives of another country. One similar trend that's been found in the research is that there are certain characteristics of the individual or their life experiences that make them more vulnerable to become victims of trafficking. They may have a history of sexual abuse or domestic violence situations, mental health concerns and substance abuse, individuals who are runaways or youth who are homeless or in the foster care system, as well as individuals who have economic hardship and financial strains. What they find is a trend in all these individuals that they don't have a sufficient support system, that they tend to be more susceptible to the psychological, emotional, and financial lures that the trafficker utilizes. It seems more appealing to them, so it makes them more likely to become a victim of human trafficking. Also, individuals who do not have a legal immigration status or those who are migrating and relocating are at a greater risk. Some research has shown that after natural disasters where children have been separated from their parents, that child is at a higher risk. And individuals who are adults who have lost everything in the disaster, that appeal from the trafficker of a better life, or if they have economic hardship rising up, or just being removed from whatever their challenging current situation is, seems very appealing to them. And the trafficker leverages that to pull them into the trafficking situation. The perpetrators of human trafficking are varied. Just like there's no one profile of a victim, there's no one profile of the individual who's the trafficker. They may be of the same socioeconomic class as the victim, or there may be a power and financial differential. It's unfortunate to hear that individuals who are family members, loved ones, partners, they may be the one putting that other person into the trafficking situation. The victim may not even feel or realize that they are a victim, or that they're being exploited, because they think they're helping out. They think that they are doing the right thing. Other individuals, if it's a business situation, they may think they're engaging in legitimate work, or that this is normal or typical. They may not even realize that the exploitation is occurring, which is why we really need to look beneath the surface. And that's a slogan that's out there related to recognizing human trafficking, that it may not always be visible and obvious. We have to put all the pieces together. Different recruitment techniques that are utilized by the trafficker are typically big false promises that are going to fill the void for that vulnerable individual, that makes them become trapped in that trafficking situation. A better life, better finances, maybe it's just more emotional support. Some triggers that you may hear during your conversations with your patients or clients that might alert you to it potentially being a trafficking situation is if for their work situation they were brought to an unfamiliar area, or they're being kept in an area and they don't have a contract. They didn't understand the contract. It had excessive fees they have to pay for a particular work opportunity. If the individual is being showered with gifts where there's that difference in either significant age or socioeconomic class, where one person could potentially be exploiting the other, we need to be looking out for those situations, because our patients do talk to us that we may catch some of these pieces of information and put them together with everything we're discussing to recognize a potential trafficking situation. As we're working with our patients, we need to evaluate them for the healthcare services that we are providing, and we want to be mindful, particularly for individuals who are victims of human trafficking, that if we're treating them as a survivor, all of the different health impacts from their time of exploitation, so that we can address comprehensive care. Acute injuries that an individual may sustain can be the result of the physical abuse that they are enduring, as well as the work circumstances that they have to endure. It might be extremes of heat, temperature, that is causing excessive exhaustion and dehydration, or just the hours that they are having to work. If the individual is not supplied with the appropriate personal protective equipment for the job that they're engaging in, and usually these individuals are not receiving training in the skills that they need to execute the job, you may see injuries that would normally not occur given their line of work if they were particularly skilled at it and educated and had the right equipment. Different bruises, scars, injuries that occur, or injuries from physical abuse that they are enduring. If the individual was taken for previous care that was not actually rendered by a healthcare professional, they may develop infections or have mutilations that we notice, and now they're being brought in for the correct level of service. Looking at more chronic conditions, this can be related to not having appropriate food, so malnutrition is exhibited in both adults and children. Particularly in children, it may evidence itself as impaired growth and development. From the work situations, there may be chronic pain and overuse patterns. The malnutrition can also lead to dental issues. Consider all the different body systems. If the individual is working without appropriate personal protective equipment, they may be inhaling fumes from chemicals or dust that lead to respiratory issues, loud noises, having even eye injuries or strained vision can occur. Looking at substance abuse or addictions, this may be forced by the trafficker to try and control the victim, or the individual may be utilizing different substances just to try and cope with the situation that they are in. Mental health issues have been identified as a significant concern long term for individuals who are victims of trafficking, from the daily mental and physical abuse and torture that they have potentially been experiencing. Their reactions are going to be very different for each individual. And it's been noted that unfortunately, a lot of this becomes a persistent long-term mental health concern, that the individual needs significant support to deal with the psychological trauma. We need to know, because of all this, when the person is interacting with us, we may not have a typical response to our attempts to engage them. So we can't make generalizations about how we expect the individual to react. We just need to know that their coping strategies are going to vary, and they will need services to help them develop those strategies. Culture shock is another consideration. If an individual is in the country that is new to them, or they are in just a different part of the country that is not familiar to them, maybe different language, different environment, they may be also experiencing culture shock in addition to their trafficking situation and the psychological and emotional strain from that situation. Sometimes this can evidence itself as somatic health complaints, and these, again, can be after the trafficking situation persists. Complaints of headache, back pain, dizziness, weakness could occur. Looking at long-term consequences of reproductive and sexual health from the abuse, trauma, being forced to engage in different sex acts, the individual may have developed different diseases and sustained physical trauma. It can lead to not only potential infertility or consequences from multiple abortions that they have been forced to undergo. There's also urinary difficulties that can develop. So multiple systems that could become involved long term. Quality of life also needs to be considered, that as plans are developed to support individuals who are rebuilding their lives after they leave their trafficking situation, the dangers of re-exploitation and re-traumatization have to be addressed. Community resources are playing an important role in this process for them to rebuild their life so that they are not again vulnerable to another trafficker. Because those mental health challenges seem to be dominant and persistent as a consequence of the trafficking situation, strategies need to be incorporated for the individual to regain power, find that personal strength, appreciate that there are positive things in life and they do have a life to look forward to. I read an interesting 2019 dissertation, Voices of Domestic Sex Trafficking Survivors, and it, in an in-depth way, outlined the different components of the successful path to independence. Relationship development is an important component to combat the social isolation the individual has previously experienced. Peer support is something they have been deprived of and may have been an initial vulnerability that they had. So now that needs to be incorporated to serve as an instrument for healing. It's been recognized that survivor leadership plays a significant role in reestablishing a healthy life for the individual, that helping others helps that individual progress along their path, ultimately getting to that point of post-traumatic growth and establishing their new life. As healthcare providers, if we are not trained to recognize victims so that we can intervene, the criminals go unnoticed, victims fall through the cracks, and the perpetrators just continue unchecked. We need to recognize, being on the front lines, that we have the opportunity to step in and assist through identifying victims. We need to think of the different clinical settings where we can encounter these potential victims, whether it's in emergency departments or urgent cares, Planned Parenthood, hospitals, home health settings, nursing homes, dental clinics, particularly in massage services and massage therapy schools. We might encounter individuals who are victims of either labor and or sex trafficking. We're considering, when we're looking at who might be a victim, the patient we're actually treating, the individual who might be accompanying the patient, coworkers, service providers, vendors. We really need to have our eyes open everywhere to spot potential victims of human trafficking. There are several barriers to disclosure for individuals who are victims. They may not self-identify. Oftentimes, they do not self-identify for many different reasons, whether they blame themselves for being in the situation, they just don't trust that anyone would believe them, or they have concerns about legal consequences for what they've been involved in or their immigration status. And then that force, fraud, and coercion may be preventing them from self-identifying. This presents challenges to identifying and responding to the potential victims. They are not likely to ask for help. They don't reach out. They've been coached on what to say, how to carry themselves, and they're afraid not to do that or feel like they have no other choice. We need to resist making a quick judgment because of that and really pay attention and put all the pieces together. Building trust over time allows the individual to feel more comfortable sharing information about their experiences to us as clinicians so that we can gather the whole story. In order to do that, we need to have perspective of victim mindset and consider where they are coming from to know how to interact appropriately and to understand why they don't identify so we can create a situation where they will share with us. They might just be afraid that there are so many ways that they can be threatened or forced into complying with what the trafficker is asking. Or they just don't realize it's a crime what they're participating in. Maybe where they're coming from, whatever country or situation, they are conditioned just not to trust people. Maybe the government's corrupt. They never had that safety net. So they just don't feel like anyone is going to believe them or assist them. Some of the coping mechanisms may be that that trafficker is the first person that they think cared for them or is providing for them and for their needs, even though it's not in an acceptable, appropriate manner. So they start to develop positive feelings towards that individual and almost protect them. Or the individual is just so isolated physically because of language, they don't know where they are, that they're unable to be able to self identify and reach out for that assistance. Mindful of this, we're going to use a trauma informed approach to our interacting. When we interact in this way, it bears in mind what the individual has gone through, the physical, the emotional, the psychological stress and torture that they have sustained. It's a delicate balance between bringing traffickers to justice, which is important on the whole, so that human trafficking is combated. But that needs to be balanced with building trust for the individual that we are working with. Additionally, we need to consider that the individual is at risk for additional trauma. Just by going through the process of self identifying, trying to get themselves out of the situation and build that new life. We need to be sure that we're supporting their rights and their needs so they can build that new life, that we need to avoid re traumatization through the process of getting them help and reestablishing life. There are many indicators of human trafficking and red flags to be aware of. Something may come up in conversation or during our assessment of the individual. Not all of the indicators have to be present for it to be a case of human trafficking. And remember that as healthcare providers, we are not investigators. That is not our job. Our job is to be aware. And if there are enough indicators that in good faith we think the individual might be a victim of trafficking, that then we can report that and try to get assistance for that individual. If we're wrong, but we were in good faith thinking that we're trying to assist this person, you don't have to be as concerned about a negative consequence for yourself. There are mechanisms we'll talk about where you can just report a tip. What you want to listen for when you're interacting with the individual, or if you're going out into different settings, what you want to look for related to their living conditions is someone who can't come and go on their own, that they're physically brought, often as a group, to the workplace and taken back to their living place, or maybe it's even the same location. If they're in an environment that's high security, dogs, guards, fences, even something that may seem simple where the windows are covered in something opaque, that might be a way of isolating that individual or not letting others see what's going on inside. When you're talking about them, about their sleeping situation, for example, are they saying that they sleep on the floor, they don't have a bed? This image is from an actual case in California where it was an old apartment complex where there were sewing rooms put in, and then in the basement were the living quarters for the workers. They needed to pay for all of their personal hygiene items in order to live, to get their food out of this very small salary that they were given, and they were never permitted to leave. So the employer provided so low of a salary, charged such high cost for all of these life expenses, that the individual was never able to pay off that debt. When we look specifically at the work situations, we know some individuals, they're working for minimum wage. They don't have jobs that they love. They're mundane tasks. That is very different than human trafficking, where the individual is either forced to perform sex acts or they are working under conditions that are not in accordance with fair labor practices. They have quotas they need to reach. They're not giving breaks. They're not giving personal protective equipment. Seasonal work particularly heightens the vulnerability for individuals because they're moved around, that it may be more difficult to catch these inappropriate work conditions. Individuals who say that they can't leave their job, they're not allowed to change it. They have very little money that they're being paid, or maybe the money doesn't even cross their hands, would be red flags. Mental health behavior, when we're working with the individual in the clinic, they may have very elevated emotions, react in more of a high anxiety, paranoid, anxious kind of state, or they might be at the other end of the spectrum where they are more submissive and withdrawn. There's no one way an individual may present. If they see law enforcement around the facility or that comes up, they may become more unsettled and anxious also. As we look at physical indicators of potential human trafficking, we need to assess the individual for whatever medical condition they're presenting to us for, and we're going to be mindful of looking at the whole person. This is, in particular, a difficult slide and information to discuss. I think it's important, though, if you have not encountered some of the physical manifestations of abuse that individuals may endure, that you do have an understanding of it so you can recognize it if an individual presents. When we're assessing individuals, we should look at their face, at their teeth, regardless of what region of the body we are treating them for. Signs of malnourishment can be indicative by poor oral hygiene. Teeth may be missing from physical abuse. If we look at the individual's scalp and hair, if they're missing patches of hair, that could be from how they were drugged or controlled through their hair. When we consider different wounds and injuries that someone can present with on different areas of their body, whether they're major traumas like broken bones that may be appearing on scans, or other traumas to the skin and the surface tissue, when we see injuries that are all at different phases of healing that are not likely to have resulted from one particular trauma, that would be, let's say, a motor vehicle accident, then we might have a concern that it's some type of abuse that the individual is enduring. When we look at the different physical injuries, where injury patterns present is something that could just be a red flag in and of itself. When a child falls down, they're usually going to hit their shins or hit the T-zone of their face. An individual who may be experiencing beatings in order to control them, it's usually going to be performed in an area that will not injure the person to a point where they're unable to perform work for their trafficker, or where the injury would be obvious to others. So it may be on the low back, for example. As we look at the different injury patterns, Injuries that are more linear, as in the first image, these injuries can occur from someone being struck with a thin wire or some type of thin object. Anytime there's like a symmetry or a pattern, it's usually a concern. The next image, the individual, if you see two parallel bruises or marks with a space in between, and then unfortunately this individual also has the mark and the bruising on the ear, that could be from being struck with a belt. Someone who is restrained, usually it's circumferential types of wounds around the wrists, ankles, even the neck. If it's from a rope, it might be a combination of a bruise as well as an abrasion together. Someone who might physically be moved against their will could present with more of a road rash. And if that's not associated with a particular injury pattern or mechanism of injury that makes sense, it would be a red flag. Individuals who are sustaining burn injuries, this often is going to be a small, circular, about 1 centimeter round type of injury, usually on areas that are more exposed, the arm or the hand, the back of the neck. They may be all at various stages of healing. And then looking at tattooing, branding, these might be unusual types of tattoos. It has been noted that some individuals do have barcodes, for example, on the back of their neck, something that the trafficker may be utilizing as a way to identify the individual as their property. Red flags that would alert us to the lack of control that the individual who is the victim is suffering is that they may never be alone. They may be escorted at all times, might not be permitted to speak for themselves, or when they do, it's a very scripted conversation, and what they're describing and what you're seeing in their physical presentation doesn't make sense. The individual may not have any personal possessions. They don't have a cell phone. They don't even have their own personal documents or their money when it comes time to pay. Might be giving very short, brief answers when who's ever accompanying them is around. They might have someone who is with them who's really rushing their care, trying to get it done quickly and get them out. That's compromising their medical services. These would be areas that are concerned when you put them together with the rest of the picture. If you do recognize several red flags and you're considering that it might be a potential case of human trafficking, number one, you need to consider your safety as well as that of those around you. You have to assess the level of danger and decide, is it appropriate for you to intervene in some way at that point in time? You don't want to endanger yourself because then you're not going to be able to assist the individual. You also don't want to alert the trafficker that may be there or the escort on behalf of the trafficker that you're becoming aware of the situation. You need to consider your different course of action. If you're unsure if the individual is a victim of trafficking and you feel that it's safe to engage in more questioning with them, you can do that. If you have a concern that they may put them in danger, then your decision might be to make a call to seek help to allow you to report the case and get the individual assistance in that way rather than physically stepping into the situation and confronting the trafficker yourself. That is not something that you would want to do. As we consider whether or not to call 911 or utilize some of the other resources that we'll discuss for assistance, if there is immediate physical harm that is a concern and immediate danger, 911 would be the call to make. However, calling law enforcement may not be in the best interest of the individual who is the victim of trafficking. It's up to law enforcement to investigate, and that does take time. The person who's the victim of trafficking, they may need immediate assistance to get them out of the situation. That would necessitate different resources than what's provided immediately by law enforcement. Also, when contacting law enforcement, we do need to consider that the individual who is the victim could be found to be not in compliance with laws related to other crimes such as drugs, weapons, prostitution. If the individual goes down that path where they incur a criminal record, this could put them at risk for developing that life after they're removed from their trafficking situation. They might not be able to apply for a job if they have a criminal record, or get custody or retain custody of their child. Certain benefit programs, if you have a criminal record, you're ineligible for. So it might not be the best decision for the individual for you to call 911. You might want to explore other reporting options. If you are able to engage the individual safely to gather more information and determine if this is a potential case of human trafficking, you want to establish a relationship. That's critical that you create an atmosphere where the potential victim feels safe to express to you additional information. The first step in that is to separate them from the individual accompanying them. You need to do this in a discreet manner, maybe by saying you need to take a urine sample or expose a particular area of the body that you can't have someone else present for so that you can get them alone. When you're interacting, remember that you do want to reassure them of their safety. That is key. It's something that's lacking in their current circumstance, but do not make any specific promises. Make sure that you address their physical needs. They are being deprived of the most basic life necessities and kindness. By just offering a drink, give them some power, let them pick where to sit in the room. Those little gestures can go a long way to showing the person that you truly care, and it might let them feel comfortable that they can open up to you. In healthcare, we tend to need to touch our patients. We need to be close to them. For individuals who are victims of trafficking, using that trauma-informed approach and communication, we need to recognize that bringing up questions and ideas related to their situation may evoke physical and emotional responses. By touching the individual, they may have only experienced negative touch, and that may come as a threat, not compassionate as we intend. You wouldn't want to do that to the individual. Keep an open posture. Be close, but not too close, because that could be threatening. Calm, empathetic, non-judgmental language to slowly build a rapport with the individual. You're not investigating. You're not pressing for a story in every detail. You want to just create a situation where they can start opening up. As you're choosing your words for the conversation, don't go right in first to try and identify those red flags. Start on the periphery of the conversation. You might even decide, based on your facility policy and comfort level, that at some point you bring in a social worker or another colleague and make sure everyone's on the same page with creating this comfortable environment for the individual. You're going to pose some questions just within casual conversation about the living and working circumstances. Can they come and go as they please? Looking for more information on those red flags. Then you can move into follow-up questions if you seem like the path is leading you towards a potential trafficking situation, looking at their freedoms of movement, potential threats that they may have, concerns they may have about their safety. As you're engaging with the patient or the individual, you need to determine if they're not communicating with you and someone else is doing that for them. Is it because they have a language barrier, or are they being controlled? If you get the sense that they're being controlled, you don't want to use that individual accompanying them, who may be the trafficker, as your interpreter, because the information will not be accurate. You'll consider using a professional interpreter through a couple of different mechanisms. You want to use someone that you know is not biased. It might be an individual who's a coworker at your facility that you know is not potentially related or involved in some way to the trafficking situation. The facility may have a list of professional interpreters that they are utilizing. If that's the case, consider if it's on the phone or electronically, is that creating an appropriate environment where that potential victim of trafficking is going to feel comfortable? That's the goal. We want to make sure, in using a professional interpreter, that they recognize cultural considerations for the interaction, as well as it's truly creating an environment where we get accurate and honest information from the individual and we're making them feel comfortable to express themselves. If we reach the point where we do feel that this is potentially a human trafficking situation and we're looking at how to intervene, there are several different mechanisms the clinician can utilize to obtain assistance. The practitioner can reach out for assistance, and the individual who's the victim can also reach out for the assistance to either law enforcement, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, or other state agencies. When in doubt, you want to report human trafficking through one of the different mechanisms. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is not an immigration service. It's not law enforcement. It is designed to connect individuals who are victims of human trafficking with resources so they can escape their situation. It's also available if you're not sure, you just have a sense that maybe it's a trafficking situation. You can contact them to report the tip or to get direction on what is the next most appropriate action. They can be accessed through texting. Either text help or info to Be Free, which is 233-733. There's a phone number, a website, as well as email available. They're available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Services are available in 200 different languages. In the state of Texas, reporting can go directly to the district attorney's office. If you call the non-emergency number, you can just ask for someone who investigates the human trafficking cases. The Department of Public Safety is another option. Cases involving children can be reported to the Department of Child Protective Services. And then the Office of the Attorney General can be contacted directly to investigate also. Mandatory reporter obligations are sometimes challenging for healthcare clinicians to reconcile because HIPAA is in the forefront of their mind. HIPAA was designed to protect patient confidentiality. It was not meant to prevent the reporting of crimes or prevent the reporting of trauma and human trafficking. That's not the intent of it. So you do not need the patient's consent in order to report a tip of human trafficking. Anytime there is a child involved, you are required to report to law enforcement. If you're in a state that has mandatory reporter obligations, just calling the hotline number is not sufficient. Reporting in terms of mandatory obligations means that the direct contact has to go to local law enforcement. As healthcare providers, our role in intervention and response is to identify victims, report tips, to help the person to access different services to escape their human trafficking situation. And in order to accomplish that, we need to know what red flags to look for and then how to interact appropriately with the individual. Also, when we are coding different interventions, if there are codes available to help gather additional data, we want to make sure we're doing that documentation appropriately. Documentation plays several different roles in the big picture of human trafficking. It allows better data to be collected to get information specifically in that area, what services might be needed for victims, who the potential victims are, so that the community can be educated to also be aware. It allows us to play a role in being part of the solution. It can inform public policy and also help with that resource development. Survivors need many different types of services to embark on their new free life. Multidisciplinary referrals are necessary, and it can allow the individual to address all the different aspects to put the pieces of their life back together. The first step is to escape their trafficking situation. In order to do that, they need someplace to go. They may need clothes to wear. They need food to eat, medical services. Those basic needs have to be addressed. They may just need transportation to physically leave their situation. Legal services and law enforcement investigation may be related to their immigration status, to any potential legal charges against them. Looking at the broader picture moving forward, the individual may need counseling and services so that they are able to restore their life and then provide for themselves education, training, addiction services. All aspects need to be addressed to help them prepare for their life and reintegrate into the community. So both long and short-term needs have to be considered. In order to address that, there are many different resources and services available. There are national agencies that use a survivor-informed and trauma-focused approach in order to determine long and short-term resources to provide survivors. The National Human Traffic Hotline, the Office of Victims of Crime, Trafficking Victim Assistance Program provide resources on their website. Local resources are also beneficial. Different communities may have different needs based on the types of human trafficking that is occurring. Building that trusted network of local resources can help coordinate the services for the individual, provide that immediate assistance that they may need, and those services need to be available for foreign nationals as well as domestic individuals. There are several different databases that are available through the National Human Trafficking Hotline as well as the Office for Victims of Crime to search for local services in your area that you can have available to provide victims. There are several models that exist of organizational protocols that can be in place with best practices to serve victims and survivors of human trafficking by having procedures in place that include educating healthcare providers with everything that we're discussing today are important so that procedures can be implemented and resources can be readily available for when these situations arise and potential victims present themselves. One simple strategy that could be part of a protocol is just requiring that every patient is seen alone for some point in their visit, and then that clinician uses appropriate communication to present them with an opportunity to share information that may allow us to assist. Several different resources exist for protocols that have already been designed with input from multidisciplinary agencies of professionals collaborating to combat human trafficking using a public health perspective through the Blue campaign, SOAR, which is Stop, Observe, Ask, and Respond training, Rescue and Restore toolkits, and HEAL trafficking, which is health, education, advocacy, and linkage. The healthcare professional's role in anti-trafficking efforts is to be vigilant in recognizing the red flags and identifying potential victims, to create environments where individuals feel safe and comfortable. We play a significant role in reporting tips and also to understand that the opportunity we have to connect victims with resources in the community to help them rebuild their lives. By identifying victims and reporting tips, we are helping rescue them, and you might save a life. Thank you very much for attending this course. In order to obtain your continuing education hours, you want to return to the website cheapceus.com. Scroll down to this topic. Go to the right and click Take Course Post-Test. You want to achieve a score of 70% or higher, and the post-test can be retaken multiple times if needed. Once you achieve that score of 70%, you're going to submit your payment and print your certificate. Thank you again for attending this course.